your first property deal isn't what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's just one property deal. Like, it doesn't matter. You should do the easiest thing possible just to get something done. Just because someone says, this is a great deal and this is below market value, it doesn't mean it's a great deal and it's below market value.
What's your favorite deal that you've done and why?
I think my favorite deal was...
Welcome back to another episode of the PBK podcast. Each and every week we bring a special guest, and this week is super special because we are doing it live and direct for the entire Gen Z Club 2025. So it's not only going to be a podcast, it's also going to be informational and engaging. I'd like you to give a massive round of applause once again for Ahmed Khan. So I looked at your bio, and your bio, see, it's very, very illustrious. But it starts with from 30 plus rejections to £4 million plus portfolio. And I think the interesting part about that is the bio, the tagline, that's like the story, that's the Instagram, that's the TikTok. But what I really love about your content and your delivery is you focus on telling the truth, the long form content of actually the nuts and bolts of what it takes to get a deal across the line, whether that be a development, a rent to rent, a flip, a BRR, and everything in between. So as a starting point, I think it will be great for people to just really understand about where you started in property.
Yeah, so just to go back a step, I went to university in 2013, studied economics, and my plan, like most people who study economics, is to get some sort of job in finance, right? So I wanted a banking job, a consulting job, an accounting, some management consultancy. So I applied for the spring internships, which is a 1-week long internship. In my first year, didn't get any of those. I then applied for summer internships, which is like the 8-week internship, didn't get any of those. Applied for graduate schemes, and by the way, this is not across just finance. This is across, I applied Unilever, I applied IBM. I think I just wasn't very good at interviews, and hence, well, I'm doing one now. Let's see how this one goes. But I was never like very good at interviews. So when people ask me, like, why do you want to do banking? I had these like fake rehearsed answers in terms of, I'm really passionate about this new regulation which has just come in, which you clearly just read in the newspaper like 2 days before. And so I didn't get any of those jobs. And my plan was to get a job. I wasn't trying to get into property investing. And so by the time university finished, I thought, well, okay, I'll give myself 12 months, and if I can't make anything work because I haven't got a job, I've got nothing really to lose, I'll then start applying for jobs again, whatever that is, consulting, accounting, whatever that is. And so got into the space of property. But at that point, this is 2016, there isn't that much content out there. There's a few books out there, and there's a few companies doing courses and stuff, but it's not like today where you go on YouTube and there's all these strategies where it's like, well, you can do you can do deal packaging, and you can do Airbnb, and you can do HMOs. So my introduction to property investing was basically buy to lets. Anyway, so it was basically buy to lets. It was, well, you buy a property, you rent it out, and you make that work. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I can do this. But very clearly you realize, well, you need a lot of money to do buy to lets. It's like, well, where's the money coming from in order to do this? So I started attending events like this and very quickly found out about these other strategies. Well, you can actually rent a property and then just stick it onto Airbnb and make money that way. And you don't need £50,000 or £100,000. You can start with £2,000, £3,000. All you really need is a deposit, 1 month rent advance, some furniture, and a couple of £100 in legal fees. And if the apartment's already furnished, you don't even need the furniture, and you can get deposit insurance. So you're in for like £1,500, £2,000. So I started doing rent-to-rent service accommodation, where you're renting properties, putting them onto Airbnb. The way I got started, like I mentioned before this podcast, I started working for someone else. So I found someone who was already doing it, because I think hands-on experience, you just can't beat that. Like you can watch videos and you can hear someone else say it, but until you're actually there in the property and you're doing the viewings and you're meeting the agents and so on and so forth, like nothing quite beats that. So my view was, I need the education, I need the foundation, but at the same time, I need to like be out there, like actually speak to people, not just have theory in my head and not have, just have notes on a piece of paper. So, that's what I started doing. I started working for someone else. We did a few deals together. That gave me the confidence, more importantly than the skill and knowledge. I think confidence is probably one of the biggest things. And then I started renting my own properties. Rented one Airbnb, rented the next Airbnb, rented the next Airbnb. Eventually moved into managing other people's Airbnbs. So that's imagine like someone has an Airbnb and you say to them, well, I'll run this Airbnb for you. You don't have to deal with the cleaning and the bookings and the hassle and everything else. And I'll take 15%, 20%. Now you don't need any money because you're just running someone's business like a letting agent, right? Now you need nothing. And so that allowed me to take on more and more and more properties, eventually built up a large Airbnb portfolio. And then from there, I always wanted to, like I said, I always wanted to buy properties. I didn't necessarily want to do rent to rent. It's just, I started after university with no job, so I had to do rent to rent. Eventually moved into buying a property. So the first one I bought was a 1-bedroom flat in Battersea Park in London, ex-council, so nothing fancy, not one of those brand new ones. Bought a 1-bed flat, turned into a 2-bed flat, refinanced, which basically just means got a new mortgage, pulled some of my money back out, use that money to buy the next one, buy the next one, buy the next one. And then COVID hit. So I live in Stevenage in Hertfordshire. COVID hit. I was thinking, well, what can I do in Stevenage rather than commuting in and out all the time? And so where I live in Stevenage is really good for turning houses into flats. So I bought a house, I turned that into 2 flats, bought a mixed commercial property, turned that into 4 flats. And then most recently I bought a house, which I turned into 5 flats. So it's been, it's been a slow, long 8 years, right? It's not like it's just happened overnight. It's taken a while, but yeah, it's really been a transition of rent to rent into small developments, into slightly bigger developments. And they're still not huge developments. I mean, they're only 4 or 5 flats, but it's working towards that.
Mm-hmm. I think, look, for me, and I hope for everybody else listening here today, one takeaway from that is when people often ask, like, how do you get started? Going into doing a development of 4 or 5 flats, which by the way is still like, a massive achievement, but starting from maybe not having the funds, maybe just coming out of university, hearing a lot of those no's should really help motivate you to see how it is possible. And the reality is it doesn't happen overnight. Property isn't like a get rich quick scheme, but it can be amazing for creating generational wealth, for building that cash flow, that passive income to allow you to spend your time and efforts to focus on whatever it is that you really want to do. I think there was so much to unpack in that story. And as a starting point, I want to ask the question, because I know a lot of you spend a lot of time now consuming content on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and so many other mediums. But for somebody who's stuck in that content consumption without action phase, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, and this is actually a very common problem. I think I would say probably 99% of people are in that problem. And I think the issue is the more content you watch, unfortunately, the more options you have at the same time, because then you go, shit, like he's saying HMOs is better and he's saying service accommodation is better and he's saying this thing is better. I think you have to take a step back and you have to realize your first property deal isn't what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one property deal. Like it doesn't matter. It's like you do, I don't know, SATs, and then you do GCSEs, and then you do the next thing, and then you do the next thing. You don't go, oh, well, the GCSEs I pick is going to define the rest of my life. Like, no, it's just one stage of your life. You should do the easiest thing possible just to get something done, because that momentum is worth so much more than the amount of money you're going to make. Like, for example, if you can just get something done and have the learning and the perspective and the experience and the confidence, that's worth more than £50,000, £100,000, £200,000, because it allows you to do the next thing. So, think about like a staircase, right? What is the next easiest thing you can do, the easiest step you can take, which you are confident enough that I can get this done? Because once you can get that done, you can do something slightly bigger. But if you go, I have to do the best damn thing possible in order to make the most amount of money, you're going to be there forever, because the problem is I'm going to say, well, you should do this strategy. And Kazy is going to say, well, actually, you should do that strategy. And then someone else is going to say, well, actually, there's a new strategy. Now there's rent to social housing. It used to be rent to HMOs. Then it was rent to service accommodation. Now it's rent to social housing. And there's more and more and more iterations. But the reality is, once you do something, you learn so much that will allow you to do something slightly bigger. And that will allow you to do something slightly bigger. So forget about, you have to change this perspective of, I need to do the best deal, I need to make the most amount of money, to, I just need to do something.
Yeah, I think
that's all you got to do.
I think a lot of times, your first deal, also the money isn't the main driver. It's the momentum. And on top of the momentum, it's the experience, it's the expertise, and it's the understanding. It's the non-tangible value that comes from actually doing something and maybe making a little bit of money. It might not be life-changing, but the fact that, actually, this can work. And if I move, if I iterate, if I pivot slightly, it can be even more amazing.
I was just going to say, I went to university, and if you include my student loan, maintenance loan, rent, everything else, maybe £50,000 I must have paid overall, and people are happy spending £50,000 to get some sort of education. But if you did a property project and let's say you made £2,000 profit, but we're not willing to do that because it's like, well, no, that guy made £50,000. Well, you just got to start. You just got to get started somewhere.
And I think that's it. And obviously, you all should give yourself a round of applause. Attending events like this, they are the start. They're the start of you taking action, taking steps. All the people that you speak to, like I use examples of the fact that, my architect who's in the building, when we started, we both didn't really know what we was doing. Like the first conversion I ever did over 10 years ago, he hadn't done a conversion. I hadn't done one. I was kind of like, can you do the drawings? He was like, do you trust me to do the drawings? I was like, yeah.
Is he a qualified architect?
Yeah. I wasn't just getting Bob down the road. But again, it's that imposter syndrome of can I do it? And I think the great thing about being around your peers in places like this means that you are all starting. So there is that whole, you know what, you can do it. And I don't know, any Arsenal fans in the building? Yeah, couple. But basically, obviously you saw the boy Declan Rice. For those who don't understand, he scored 2 amazing free kicks. But if you actually hear the story before, his teammate Saka just before, the plan was to cross those balls into the box, or the first one anyway. And it was because Saka said to him, he said, "Are you feeling it?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm feeling it, And it's just sometimes the confidence of a friend saying, just go for it, I believe in you, is what allows you to do amazing things. And, 3-0 Real Madrid at the Emirates, that's something amazing. But we digressed.
I'm more of a cricket guy rather than football, so...
I don't know the Brian Lara analogy, but I'm sure you can.
Brian Lara was 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah, we're back. I forgot this is Gen Z, my bad. Showing my age again. I'm stuck now, just feeling old, to be honest with you. But my other question to you is also in relation to getting started. And it segues quite well in from age because, I think people often look at things like, for example, rent to rent. And one thing I get of rent to rent is, when you were doing it in whatever year it was, 2015, 16, it was so much easier then. It wasn't saturated. What is your kind of rebuttal for people that say, it's always harder now?
Well, actually, I think there's a huge misconception here. There's a person I'm working with right now on some property development stuff, but he also has a rent-to-rent business. And it's somewhere around Oxford. It's a small town. I don't know the location exactly. Mm-hmm. He told me the name, but it's sort of hard to pronounce, so I can't remember what it is exactly. He's making £2,000 a month per Airbnb property. But here's the difference. And let me actually go back a step. Even in 2016, 2017, this is not a new problem, by the way. 2016, 2017, around the Docklands, Canary Wharf, those sort of areas, there were a lot of people doing Airbnb, and they didn't make a lot of money because it got saturated. Every single building had floods of Airbnb properties. And so people had studios and 1 beds and 2 beds, and it was saturated, wasn't doing great. And then I came across this lady who was making about £2,000 a month, £2,500 a month in the same area, making good money. And I was like, hold on a sec. Well, there's all these people saying this saturated, it's not making money, but she is somehow making money. It turned out what she was doing was she had a 4-bedroom house. Everyone else had a 1-bed flat, 2-bed flat. See, there was no saturation for a 4-bedroom house, but there was saturation for a 1-bed stroke 2-bed studios, those sort of things. So when you think about Airbnb and you think about your product, right? So, everyone's selling a product. Your product is your location plus the type of property. If an area has 100 studios and you're the only one with a 3-bed house, that's not saturation. The saturation is for the studios and the 1-beds. So as saturation increases, you have to be a bit smarter in terms of the locations you choose and the type of properties you choose. If you just analyze an area and you look at just the studios or just the 1-beds and you say, well, no one's getting any bookings, this doesn't work anymore, you might just bail out. Whereas if you say, well, actually, let me look at the 3-beds, let me look at the 4-beds, let me look at some of the outskirt areas and see how they're doing. This guy's making £2,000 a month. And I've actually heard a lot of similar stories whereby people with these larger properties are making an absolute killing. And that's the level of research you need to do. 2016, I admit, was probably easier purely because if there's no studios and there's no 1-beds and there's no 2-beds, and you can kind of take on whatever you want and you'll still do well. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to do well in today's market. You just have to be slightly smarter in terms of the stuff you pick. Mm-hmm. And the thing with larger properties is, you can sleep like 8 people, 9 people, 10 people in there. Whereas a studio, you got 2 people, 1 bed, maybe 4, 2-bed, again, maybe 4 to 6. So you have to identify that niche. And the other thing is, like I said, this area, I don't know, I don't know what it is, and that sort of is my point, which is a lot of times people go, well, I want to be in Birmingham, I want to be in Manchester, I want to be in London, I want to be in Liverpool. Those are the cities which naturally come to people's minds, right? Because these are big towns, whereas no one ever thinks about the small town. I live in Stevenage. Anyone from Stevenage or? Okay, one person. Okay. Okay, well, okay, not that popular clearly. But you know, I never thought of doing Airbnb in Stevenage. In my head, I've been in Stevenage for 20 years. I was thinking, who the hell is coming to Stevenage? You know, like people in Stevenage don't want to be in Stevenage, let alone like people coming into Stevenage. But then I found this lady on Facebook, and the only reason I found out she was doing well is because what happened is it was like a Friday night, like 10 p.m. and I was scrolling on Facebook, and she made a post that she made £1,000 from a tiny studio apartment. And you know, on Facebook, when you post something, the location gets tagged. It was tagged in Stevenage. So I thought, hold on a second, like she's clearly making money in Stevenage. And it turns out Stevenage has a lot of companies, you know, Welwyn Garden City around it has a lot of companies. And so those companies book Airbnbs. But I would have never considered Stevenage as a location. I would never think about it. So when we think about saturation, it's because we're thinking about the big cities. Think about all the small pockets around your areas and then do the research. And I think you'll have a very different perspective.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, you touched on things earlier, like it's not always just about, you know, the saturation. It's also, it can be easier for loads of different reasons. You touched on deposit replacement schemes that may have not been so prevalent 10 years ago. The use of being able to utilize AI and be an early adopter. So there's loads of reasons that you can make something work. And just because other people aren't doing it, or people are doing it before you, doesn't mean you can't do it better and find your own unique place within the market. For you pivoting into the now ownership space, what were some of the main skill sets that sort of were different between the two? And also what was some that you used, you know, to transition?
Yeah, I think there is a big difference between going from rent-to-rent service accommodation into developing properties. You know, first of all, the sums of money, you know, it's a lot bigger, and so therefore you naturally have a lot more fear because now you're not investing £2,000. Now it's like £50,000, £100,000, £200,000, and there's a lot more professionals involved in the process. So with service accommodation, all you really need is a letting agent, you know, maybe a landlord, and then you need your own cleaners and everything else. But that's really just the operational side of the business. When you move into property development, now you need to have a good broker. Now you need to have a good solicitor. Now you need to have a good architect. Now you need to have a good builder. Now you need to have, you know, all these different players. And if you're doing developments where you're doing soundproofing, now you need to have a company which does the soundproofing. Now you've got a guy who does the building regulation.
Soundproofing.
Yeah. So well, I've got a story in soundproofing actually.
Yeah, a story about soundproofing.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot more happening, and I actually always say to people, once you get the hang of property investing, it's not so much so that it's intellectually the hardest thing in the world. It's just there's a lot of spinning plates. Mm-hmm. You know, you got to deal with 15 different professionals, and that has its pros and cons because. One of the good things about property investing is that most people here, I'm assuming, have a full-time job, right? And most people don't have time to go out there and run a restaurant while also having a full-time job, run a traditional business whilst having a full-time job. The good thing about property investing is you can outsource pretty much every single thing. Mm-hmm. You can outsource the building work, the solicitor work, the legal, everything. But the downside of that is you're also then reliant on those people. And when you're getting a service from someone, even from a professional, you know, when they're selling you the service, everyone sounds great and everyone says, well, we can get you this finance and we can get you this thing. But only when you actually work with them, do you realize, can they actually deliver what they said? So you are a bit in the hands of the builder and the solicitor and so on and so forth. So I think you have to, the skill is really people management and maybe like stress management because there's too much happening which is not in your control. Whereas you don't have that with Airbnb. It's your business, you control end-to-end everything. You manage the cleaners, you manage everything else. Really, the cleaners is the only thing you need. Everything else is you just doing it yourself. So I think that's probably the key skill differential.
And I think that's the thing with development as a whole. I'm sure you'll find as you go larger, you find the bigger deals you do, the more people you can actually employ. So whilst, you know, on smaller projects, you may be kind of the project manager, so to speak, and bringing everybody together. As you start to scale, whether it's 5 units, 10 units, you then maybe have a project manager, a QS that were doing a lot of the roles that you were doing previously. And I always tell people, like, when people ask, oh, what's it like being a property developer? I say, like a secretary. It's always like just managing everybody else, keeping everybody else on track. Like you're everybody else's assistant almost to make sure they're doing, because you can't wholly just rely on everybody, because they're your goals, they're your dreams, and it's your money at the end of the day. And a lot of the time people are working for you / with you. They don't have as much on the line as you do.
Can I just say one more thing to that? I think that's a great point, which is, even though you outsource things to professionals, I think people should still, you shouldn't be of the mindset. And I've been, this is one of the mistakes I've made, which is I've said, well, I've got a builder in place. I've got an architect. The architect's going to deal with it. You eventually need to get to a position where you can double check every single thing every single person is doing. If they say, like, for example, I had an architect, we turned a house into 4 flats. Well, it was mixed commercial into 4 flats. And he had the national space standards wrong, because one of the flats was across 2 floors. And now the sizes are different if it's on 2 floors as opposed to 1 floor. And he was ready to submit. Everything was done and dusted. And I was like, hold on a second, like these are not the right sizes. And by the way, this is an architect who's been an architect for 20 years. It's a simple mistake, but if you just assume, well, I've got someone, he's going to deal with it. I don't know. Like I'm not a huge fan of that. I think you need to get to a stage where, to your point, is like you are the secretary and the project manager, that you need to understand this is what's happening and how everything works, so you can double check everything. Otherwise, you're going to be in a situation where you're so reliant on other people. And I know it's one of those things where you want to hire good people and you want to outsource it. But at the same time, I think you got to know your stuff, man. Like if you don't,
I think to be able to hire, you have to have almost walked the walk first. So same with like the Airbnb space. If you don't know how to get good reviews, but then people are saying, oh, just outsource to a VA. The VA is only going to be as good as your teaching if you've never done it yourself.
Same with deal sources.
Yeah.
People always say to me, like, I'm going to use a deal sourcer and they're going to send me a deal. And I listen, there's a lot of deal sources out there, and some are good and some aren't so good. And you have to know what's a good deal. Just because someone says, well, this is a great deal and this is below market value, it doesn't mean it's a great deal and it's below market value. It's just what someone thinks it is. So you have to know. And to your point, you can only outsource something once you truly understand it yourself. Because if you don't understand it, how do you know that they're going to do a good job, So I agree, completely agree.
Okay, so question for you now. Like, you've been doing this for a while. What's your favorite deal that you've done and why?
Oh God, my favorite deal. I think my favorite deal was probably my first deal actually. Battersea Park. It was a small 1-bedroom apartment, ex-council, 5th floor, no lift, and I think the reason it's my favorite deal is because it was a 1-bed which I turned into a 2-bed flat, refinance. The numbers, aren't amazing. I'll go through them. I bought that for 237,000. I spent about 23,000 pounds on the refurb, and then it was revalued at 320,000. 4 years ago. I sold it last year for 370,000. So it made a decent profit. But I think for me, there was such a mental barrier that can I actually like do it? Like, can I actually like buy something and add value, and like, is it going to work? Or like, am I missing something here? Like, am I going to get stuck somewhere? Like, is it too good to be true? And, like you go through all of those things. And I think completing that first project, even though I've done slightly bigger things, it never quite feels the same as the first one, because you're just so relieved that it actually worked, And up till that point, I thought, well, I do rent to rent and I've done Airbnb, but I don't think I can buy a property, which doesn't make any rational sense. I get that, but it's just this like mental fear that there's so many things could go wrong, and this could go wrong, and that could go wrong. And funnily enough, actually, I bought that on bridging finance, which a lot of people have fears about bridging finance, and I actually don't think it's that bad, but there's a lot of fear around bridging finance. That deal was finished 1 day before the bridging finance ran out. So it was a bit touch and go. And then even on the refinance, I had a broker who said, you're not going to be able to refinance it. And his reason was that the property is too close to a train line, right? And I was like, what in London is not close to a train line? Like the whole city is flipping close to a train line. But he was adamant that I'm not going to get financed on it because it was so close to a train line. It also had a mortgage restriction. There was a bunch of other issues. In the end, I got an 80% loan to value mortgage. It was all done and dusted. But yeah, for me, that's probably like the best one for me because it was the first one and it went over the line. And then I bought another 1-bed in Vauxhall, another one in London Bridge, another one in Brixton, another one in West Hampstead. And I never had that fear ever again because I was like, well, I've done it once. How hard could it be just to do the same thing again and again? But yeah, for me, it took forever to do the first one. It took me about 16 months to do the first one.
Yeah, I think once you find something that works, that's the great thing about property. You look across the skyline and, everything that previously was just views is now opportunities. You're thinking, oh, I did one over there. I wonder what else I could do in the same building or the same area. You've touched on sort of obviously the people that you use, between solicitors to mortgage brokers. You've had a lot of them on today's stages. Who would you say is like your three most important people that you use when it comes to developing property?
So I would say, first one is I would say the architect, because right now the stuff I'm trying to do, I need planning permission. And so the architect becomes such a pivotal, character in this, because if you can't get over the first hurdle, it's like, well, it's game over from there, right? So I would say the architect. The way I work with architects is a bit different to most people. So, architects in this country are very expensive, as you will know. Like they charge £500 to like draw like a floor plan or something. So I have an architect in the Philippines. And so what I tend to do is I basically give her the instructions that, well, this is what I'm looking for. And then she does all the renders and the drawings and the floor plans and elevations and everything else. And I'm about to put a scheme in for planning next week. And I think I've spent about £800 on everything, on the feasibility schemes, on the elevations, on the existing, on the proposed, on the site plan, block plan, you name it. It's cost me £800. I mean, an architect in this country for £800, I mean, they wouldn't even look at you for £800. So architect is number one. I would say the builder is number two. The challenge is, like, everyone says, get a good builder and get someone reliable. But the problem is, like, if a builder hasn't correctly judged how much work it's going to be, and let's say the builder's also running out of money and they're also short in cash, if the builder's struggling, you're then going to struggle, because they're going to start having those issues with you, and they're going to start saying, well, this is an extra cost, and that's an extra, and this is an extra. And to some degree, you are in the hands of the builder, because once the project has started and someone has gutted the building out and someone has opened up the roof, if they're not playing ball, I mean, what are you really going to do? You're not going to be like, oh, well, you leave, I'll get a new builder in. Everything's already open. You're on bridging finance. You have 7 months to completion. You can't then say, well, let me get a new builder in and let me do this and let me do that. So I would say builder number two. You gotta have the right builder. Architect, builder. I don't know if I have a third one, to be honest. I would say, I guess a broker is a bit of a cop-out, but I don't really have a third. I would say if you can get a good architect who can get you the scheme, and you got someone who can build out the scheme, everyone else, I think they're important. The solicitor is important, the broker is important, the insurance guy is important, the builder regs guy is important. But I don't think they're as important, because the other two can really make or break the deal. Everyone else, I think they facilitate the deal. But even if you have a bad broker, I think eventually you'll get it over the line. Even if you have a bad solicitor, eventually you'll get it over the line. It's not going to be make or break. Bad architect, bad builder, to me, that's make or break.
Yeah. Ooh, talking of bad, out of all your deals, we spoke about your favorite one. What deal or what lessons have you learned on a project where you said, oh, that was a steep learning curve?
Yeah, well, my last one, actually, I turned a house into 5 flats, and my builder, I hope he's not watching. my builder, he's one of those people, and this is a big lesson for me, by the way. Even though I've been doing this for a while, and like, the thing is, when we make videos, right, we say things of how they should be. In reality, it's never quite like that. If you ask me a question, what sort of agreement should you have with the builder? I'm going to say, oh, well, get a JCT contract and line itemize everything and do this and do that. The way my builder works is you tell him what you want to do, and he gives you a number. Right? Like, that's it. Like, he doesn't break it down and you say, oh, well, the walls are going to be this much and the plastering is going to be this much. He's one of those old school builders where it's like, this is the number and this is it, right? And this is someone I've used before. I've used him on 3 different projects in the past. And I think what happened is, this time round, he didn't look at the drawings properly. And he massively undercosted, like massively, even when I got the quote, I was thinking, this is pretty damn cheap. And so in the end, what happened is, as the project got longer and longer and longer and more things started cropping up, he was like, well, hold on. So, well, I never said this is included and I never said that's included. And we were going through WhatsApps, right? Like, I was going through WhatsApps and I was like, well, you said everything's included. And he said, yeah, but the flooring is not included. And I'm like, well, yeah, but everything includes flooring. And he was like, well, I never do the flooring. And he got into one of those, one of those things. And in the end, it cost me more than what I anticipated. And going forward, I probably will have an agreement in place that, well, even though you don't give me, you don't want to give me a line item, here's everything which has to be done. I worked with this builder before on 3-4 projects. I've known him for 10 years. The house I live in, my parents' house, he built my parents' house. So there was a lot of trust. There was a lot of goodwill. It wasn't like some random guy I met off the street and I said, can you do this for, this much money? So I assumed we had a good 10-year-long relationship and he was going to do what he said. But he made mistakes on his end, which ended up costing me. So yeah, that was a long, stressful project for sure.
And I think one lesson from that is sometimes as like entrepreneurs, as property owners, like we always want to win. We want to negotiate everything, but sometimes you also have to employ the kind of common sense factor as well, that if something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. And it's probably going to come back and bite you at some point. So sometimes the quote comes in this really low. Sometimes you have to give them that. You sure, mate? Like, because
the thing is, it wasn't crazy low, but it was competitive.
That sounds like optimism on your part there. But yeah, I think that's it. And I think when it comes to like contracts, you have to do the work. We speak about this across, everything, but it's your job a lot of the time to do the work. So whilst a builder may come with a scope and schedule of works, for me, I'm always like, okay, let me now put that into my own schedule. Because if I'm getting multiple quotes, you're comparing apples for apples and oranges of oranges. And I have like a line at the bottom that says, for the avoidance of doubt, I am paying for X, Y, and Z. If it's not here, that's basically the contractor's problem. It just helps. Again, nothing's ironclad, even if you go down the JCT route and anything, nothing's perfect, but it helps to avoid those costly mistakes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was saying to someone else earlier, they asked me the question, like, do you enjoy a property? And big picture, yes, overall, like this is great and doing projects is great. But whilst you're going through the planning process, it's a real pain. You're thinking, am I going to get planning? Am I not going to get planning? And then you go through the build phase and then you're thinking, man, is he going to finish on time? Is he going to finish at cost? And then you go through the refinancing stage and you're like, well, are they going to value it properly? So you go through like 9 months of hell and then it's finished and then you're glad that it's finished. And then you go, well, I'm going to repeat this and I'm going to go again. And then you go through 9 months of hell again and then you finish. It's a bit sadistic from that point of view, to be honest. But it's worth it in the end,
It is. And that's what we really see. Look, now I'm going to hand the floor over, if we can get some questions. Obviously for you who's gone and starting, not getting that job over to building, a substantial 7-figure property portfolio, a very healthy cash flowing rent to rent portfolio. I'm now going to offer an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions. Hans, we got a question over there, the gentleman in the black top. Yes, you, sir. And just for the purpose of the podcast, I'm going to repeat the question back because that mic's not linked.
Yep. My name is Charlie. First of all, I want to say thank you because you've really helped me. Your videos actually helped me build a successful Airbnb business. So first of all, thank you. Second of all, I've seen you a lot on Instagram, like advertising on Booking.com. That's obviously a big, giant in our space. How do you leverage marketing to, one, first of all, get guests essentially for your fees, but also to get potential investors to raise finance or JV, stuff like that?
Yeah, so are you going to repeat?
That's quite a long story. Just go for it. If you're watching this back, we'll put it somewhere in the comment section.
So I think it's a two-part question. First of all, the first is about marketing for Airbnbs, and the second is about marketing to raise money, as an investor yourself. I think in terms of Airbnb, you have to realize that there are booking engines. There's Booking.com, there's Airbnb, then there's which are the short stays, right? People book for 2 nights, 4 nights, 8 nights, 10 nights. Then you have a layer up from that, which is agencies like Silver Door, Situ, Sacco, iCab, which are these corporate agencies whereby they work with these, oracles and Barclays Bank and so on and so forth, relocation companies. And you need to get in touch with them and you need to get your properties onboarded with them, because that is how you will get the long 4-month booking, 5-month booking, 6-month booking. And then on top of that, not that this is some sort of hierarchy, but on top of that, you have Spotter Home and Housing Anywhere. These are digital portals whereby you can upload your properties and you can start getting longer-term bookings, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. And I think the game is to go where the bookings are rather than you can set up your own website and you can do your own marketing and so on and so forth. But it's very, very hard work in order to get your own direct bookings. It's incredibly hard. Whereas if you can have a very optimized Airbnb profile, Booking.com profile, and by the way, when I say optimized, Booking.com and Airbnb, for example, wants you to have discounts. They want you to have early bird discounts and last minute discounts, because if you play their game, they will push you higher up in the rankings. So just have a discount. Have a early bird discount, have a last minute discount. It doesn't have to be a huge discount, but the more things you can tick off, which signals to Booking.com and Airbnb that we are playing the Airbnb game and we are trying to get more bookings. You have to keep in mind, the only way Airbnb makes money is if there's a booking. Like, if your property isn't getting bookings, why would they continue to show your property to more and more and more people? So you have to play that game. The second question is, how do you get investors? I think this room is a great starting point. There's so many like-minded people. The reality is sometimes you go to people who are not in this space or who don't have the mindset that we want to actually build something, we want to develop something. It can be hard to convince people at times because there can be a bit of negativity at times that, well, does it actually work and it's too good to be true. So I think this room is a great starting point. And second, I would say every single person, should be on social media or in some form. The biggest fear people have is that, well, I don't want to put myself out there. I've got a company, I work for a company and my company doesn't want me to be posting stuff. There are so many private WhatsApp groups, private Facebook groups where you can post in them and no one will ever see it outside of those groups. Like, that's how I started. I didn't feel comfortable posting because I was like, my friends are gonna know and family's gonna know. You get over that over time anyway, but if you want to keep it like very private, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, networking events, you can post, you can make content in there, and you can, network a lot. But if you really want to go full throttle, I think stuff like this, you should be interviewing people, you should be making videos about your projects. Most people in this room, I'm assuming, haven't started yet and you're looking to start, but that doesn't mean you can't make content. You can interview people. You can say to people, hey, you can message people like me and say, well, you're doing a project, can I come and film? It's promotion for me and it's promotion for you. It works for both people. And once you have your own project, you also have this back catalog where you've interviewed him and you've interviewed me and you've been to that person's side. You're also networking. So I think the more content you can make and, the more you can get out there, the better for sure. It will make raising money so much easier. So much easier.
Thank you. Great answer. I think, where are we? We go to the front over here, please.
Hi, thank you so much. So my name's Valentina, and we'll watch your YouTube content. You specifically mentioned two things supported, which is gaining experience and finding the right mentor. Now, for those people with full-time jobs that don't have availability Monday to Sunday or whatever, what would your advice be for them to set up themselves properly to get that mentor and to get that experience, say, service accommodation and shadowing their mentor?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a lot of people do fit into this camp where they have a full-time job. I think you have to find time somewhere, even if it's half an hour with a lunch break, even if it's because by the way, the thing you have to realize is when you're starting out, property investing is not really a full-time business. And that's one of the advantages you have. Airbnb is time consuming, because there are guests constantly coming and going and there's so many bookings. It's 24/7, 365. Property development isn't that. If hypothetically someone was shadowing for me or they said, well, can I do some work for you? If you can do 45 minutes a day, it's probably more than enough. It might be analyzing a couple of deals here and there. It might be, booking some viewings here and there. But I would not expect anyone to commit 4, 5, 6 hours a day. I don't think I do 4, 5, 6 hours a day, in my own property business, because what happens is property is very ad hoc. Right now, I'm applying for planning permission, so the workload is a bit higher. But once that planning permission is done, my workload is not 6, 7, 8 hours a day. As things come in, I analyze them, I take a look, I work with people here and there. So someone could do 45 minutes a day in a very diligent way, and I think that's more than enough. You don't need any more time than that.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. We've got time for one more question. I think we're going to go all the way to the back with a gentleman with his hand raised back there.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thanks for the amazing podcast. Really enjoying it. I'm a big fan of both of you. But one thing that you touched on, firstly, my name is Julian, sorry. But one thing that you touched on was finding investors, and one thing that I'm looking to do in particular is raise finance for a care home venture I'm going to endeavour on. For yourself, if someone was approaching you wanting to raise finance, what would be some of the key things that you'd want them to highlight or low-hanging fruit that you wouldn't want them to miss?
So just to clarify, is the question if you were to ask me to invest?
Yeah, so yourself personally, as an investor, what are some of the key things that are important to someone that wants to raise finance through you?
Well, I'd say that both of us are probably the wrong people to ask. And not that you're asking us, but the reason I say this is we are both trying to do our own projects, right? So when every now and then someone says, well, I've got a deal, can you invest? And my answer always is, well, I'm trying to do my own deal. So I'm actually the wrong person, right? You need people who are professionals who want nothing to do with property, and all they care about is a 8% return, 9% return, 10% return. So most of my investors are people who don't do property investing themselves. Because the problem is, if I say to a property investor, I can make you a 10% return, they say, well, I'll watch a video, I can make 20% return. Whether they can or can't is a different story. But you get into this thing where, because they've seen content, they go, well, 10% isn't enough, because if I do this and if I do BRR and if I get my money back out, the people I go to have nothing to do with the property. They never want to see a property. They never want to touch a property, right? And so if you say to them, well, I'll give you 8% return, they're all over that. So that's step number one. Step number two, I think credibility, is more important than anything else. I would go as far as saying most people who have invested in my projects have probably never looked at the numbers. They've gone, he knows what he's doing. He's going to deliver. I'm going to get my 8-9%. And I'm happy with that, right? If they don't trust me, the numbers can be the best numbers in the world. Someone's still going to find a hole somewhere and be like, oh, but you didn't account for this thing. And what if the rates change? And what if that thing happens? But when someone trusts you and they're like, well, he knows what he's doing because he's done it before. He's worked with that company before. He has some experience. He's got a good team. I don't know what your experience has been, and you can probably add to it. My experience has been people go, yeah, sounds about right. He knows what he's doing. Yeah. Here's the money. So
I think
you've got to do that.
Across the board, people buy into people. So you could have a great proposal, but if you look at somebody top level and think, bad people can mess up a good deal. So I think really making yourself investable as a starting point. Of course, part of that is knowing your numbers, being able to find good opportunities, being able to present them in a way that people really can sort of resonate with. But the reality is, people are going to buy into you, which is one of the reasons why personal branding. So when I do stuff like I do Zoom calls and people are like, well, I don't want to turn my camera on. I'm like, okay, but then I'm going to run into you and not remember who you are. So I think it's just really important to get yourself out there and understand what your story is, what you stand for, and what your values are, because people are going to resonate with those and then look to invest in you.
And I was just going to say, if you work with someone, whether it's for free or whatever that is, and you worked on care home projects and you come to me and say, listen, I've done care home projects. Like, I wasn't the main guy, but I was involved and I did X, Y, and Z. I will take whatever you say like 10 times more seriously. Ultimately, the problem is when you're starting out, one of the hardest things is you need some credibility, some experience. And it doesn't have to be your own projects. I started raising money for rent-to-rent service accommodation because I could say I've done 3, 4, 5 before. They weren't my projects, but I had tagged my name to other people's projects because I was there, I helped them. And that's something which every single person in this room has access to. It does, because you might be thinking, well, how am I going to do my own project and get £400,000? You don't need to do your own project and get £400,000. You just need to tag your name to something. So when you come to me, you say, this is what I worked on. This is what I delivered. I will take you more seriously. Like the substance, I think, is more important than the words which come out of people's mouths. And I think there's too much importance nowadays on what I call packaging in terms of, well, how do I spin this in like a really nice way? If you don't have like the thing, if you don't have the meat, like it doesn't matter how you spin it, I'm still not going to believe you. But if you have the thing, like you have the substance that I've done it, this is what I've delivered, you can mumble your words and you can, you don't have to be slick. You don't have to wear a suit. I'll be like, this, he knows what he's doing. Like he's done it before. So I think that's what you got to do.
Thank you. I think that's some great advice. We are going to have to let you go now. I know you do great things across all platforms, but particularly I love your long form content on YouTube. I think it's too much short form, and you really, if you want to sit down and watch like a 3-4 hour video. This
Well, the longest
man,
is 11 hours.
do you see what I'm saying? This is a man that is really going to give you the substance, the meat and the potatoes. So for those that don't know you, that have been living under a rock, how can they connect with you? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, I would say if you wanna get in touch, Instagram is probably the best way. If you wanna consume content, I would say YouTube is the best way. To your point, there's a lot of surface level information nowadays, and there's a lot of big picture overview. But if you want the most boring 11-hour video on YouTube, which goes through deal analysis and solicitors and brokers and basically A to Z. I actually met someone here earlier who's just finished his first property development project. Made £117,000. I don't know where he is. He's somewhere around here. Maybe we can stand up or something. And oh, there he is. And he made £117,000 by turning a 1-bed flat into a 2-bed flat. And he said to me, he watched my 11-hour video, which has every single tiny thing you need to know. Information nowadays is no longer the issue. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, if you want to do the projects I am doing, you can watch those 11 hours. He said to me he watched it 3 times. So that's 33 hours of, information. Every single thing you need to know is there. So that is no longer the excuse. It's about confidence, which I think most people lack. And when you're starting out, that's the hardest thing. But if you watch that thing for 11 hours, if he can make 117 and if I can make it work, I don't see why anyone else can't.
Amazing. That has been another episode of the PBK podcast. If you haven't already, in fact, do it right now. Get your phones out. If you're watching this, go and subscribe to the YouTube PBK podcast, Property by Kazy. And yeah, appreciate you coming on.